Hello, Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Pini Dunner. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, I'm very well, Rabbi Yoni. Thank you so much for inviting me onto your wonderful program, a series of different interviews. I'm extremely honored to be included among those who you've chosen to interview. What a great honor it is.
It's an honor for me, and we've had everyone and anyone from chief rabbis to perhaps future chief rabbis to Natan Sharansky and everyone and anyone in between. So it's a big honor for me. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest this evening is Rabbi Pini Dunner, somebody who needs no introduction to the St. John's Wood Synagogue community, because of course, this was one of your alma maters. This is where it all began, in the Saatchi Synagogue in 1998.
Well, actually long before. I'm going to tell you that the first ever Yom Kippur where Chief Rabbi Sachs was the chief rabbi, it was in 1991. Together with Yossi Fachler, I led the children's services at St. John's Wood Synagogue. It was absolutely packed. And I'm going to tell you what Rabbi Sachs said in his Kol Nidrei Drosha. I remember it to this day. He began by saying, we all know these jokes about people putting in light bulbs. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? You can all answer with me, he said. It takes one psychiatrist, but the light bulb's got to want to change. That's how he began his first ever Kol Nidrei Drosha as chief rabbi in St. John's Wood Synagogue. And then I actually ran the children's services, and for a time after Rabbi Shulman left, I was the closest thing they had to a rabbi in the shul. I used to speak from the pulpit, and then of course Dayan Binstock became the rabbi. He was appointed the rabbi. I went back to Hendon briefly until I came in 1998 and was the rabbi at Saatchi Synagogue in its original location at Naima JPS.
And tell me something, you know, I'm sure a lot of people watching this will be interested to know, how did it all begin, Saatchi? What was it like in the early days? You know, it's a very exciting, vibrant place. Rabbi Mendel has done amazing things with Rebbe and Chai in the community. And now, of course, we are one community, which is even more exciting. But give us a little bit of the background.
Sure. So I was, at that time, in 1998, I was the presenter on a Jewish radio program called Jewish Spectrum Radio.
Sure, I remember
which was very widely listened to by at least 15 people across London. And at that time, I became evident that it wasn't financially self-sufficient. And I let it be known that I was no longer going to continue in that role as the presenter of the radio program. And I got a call from one of the people who had been very generous to support the radio program, obviously not entirely. His name was Michael Sinclair, Dr. Michael Sinclair, who had been one of the great initiators of Jewish charitable projects during the 1990s. And he said, you know, I do a lot of work on the Upper West Side in New York, and I spend my Shabbos, I spend in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. There's a great scene there for Jewish singles, which I think that we should recreate in London. Would you be willing to come out of retirement and become a rabbi again and be the rabbi of a new community? I said, where are you going to put it? He said, well, it's interesting. They've just completed a Synagogue Sanctuary in the Naima JPS, which is not being used. Essentially, all it was an empty shul that wasn't being used by the school because the shul had never been used by the school. It was a beautiful shul. I don't know what it's used for now, but at that stage, the school had no use for it. And Michael Sinclair said, how about we use it as a community for young people from all over London to come and meet each other? And of course, under the guise of belonging to a community, so that they're not attending some loser singles event. And he approached me to be the rabbi of the synagogue. And we went on a fact-finding mission. It was during the 3 weeks in 1998. We went on a fact-finding mission to the Upper West Side. We met many people. And then we sat down on Sunday morning. Have you ever heard of great plans that have their origins, have their source on the back of an envelope? I still have the envelope.
Wow.
An envelope from the hotel that we were staying in, and I wrote all the details, how many Sidurim we should buy, how many Chumashim, how many Talesim, you know, how we should advertise, what the budget would be, etc. Every single detail was mapped out on the back of this envelope, which I still have somewhere. And we went back and we proposed it to Rabbi Levi. We came to a financial arrangement with Rabbi Levi at the time. I moved to Priory Road, next door to Lionel Curry, who's one of your members.
And a very close friend. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. He later on became a member of St. John's Wood through Saatchi, but he was originally a member of Saatchi Synagogue, and he was our neighbor. We moved in August 1998.
Wow. And
shul began, and we advertised it on the local underground, the stations.
I remember.
And all the newspapers, and the advert was a Damien Hirst tank with, instead of a dead sheep in it, it had a roast chicken in it. and we said, this is a very important project for young people. We'd like you to come. We don't want anybody who's under the age of 45 in our shul. I, at the time, was 28 years old. I'm giving my age away. And it was extremely successful, but we had no idea how many people would come. We really had no idea. So when we first advertised, there were no members, there was no existing, and it wasn't like today where you can get a network via the internet or something like that. There was absolutely no way of judging how many people would turn up. We advertised, it was also in the Jewish Chronicle, and what happened was we were totally overwhelmed. I remember that there was a comment written in the London Times and the Times in which it said it's harder to get a ticket to a Friday night dinner at Saatchi Synagogue than it is to get a dinner reservation at the River Cafe. I don't know if the River Cafe still exists, but that was at the time. And we got some of the great celebrities and politicians to come and speak Friday night dinners. We used to have 100, 150 singles come Friday night dinner every single Friday night for years. It went on for many years.
Amazing. And it still goes on to this day, and there's a legacy that you've started, so kol hakavod to you. But you know, Rabbi Pini, our families go back even earlier than this. You know, we grew up on the same road, on Hodford Road, although you were somewhat older than me. And my grandparents and your grandparents had a relationship going back to the war, to the times of Leicester. And you know, I was chatting to my brother Morris, who's a very close friend of yours today, and he described to me, he remembers how every year in the spring, my father would walk up Hodford Road, and he'd see in your front garden the beautiful tulips, and he'd always compliment your mother. And he'd say, these were the best tulips because your mother was Dutch. It was an ongoing joke.
Right.
Yes. I have very fond memories of your father as well, such a warm man. Whenever I would see him, he would give me such a kiss like I was his own child, and he exuded warmth, and it was really very, very special. And of course, you come from a lineage of many generations of rabbis. You trace your family back to 1,000 years of Europe, you know, from a rabbinic dynasty. But I want to ask you the following question. I know you're a huge fan of history, and you're renowned for your own history and your knowledge of history, being a world expert. I'm holding here your book, which I recommend everyone to buy. I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and thank you very much for not only, I think Morris bought this for me as a gift, but you inscribed it over here, and it's also dedicated in honor of my father.
Yes.
But if you could share with me, where did your love of history come from? And a bigger question really is, you keep digging up incredible historical artifacts. I've been seeing your series during the lockdown of all the historical stuff that you have in your home. How do you ensure that we make sure that none of this history is lost? How do we make sure that we take care of this history? So a few questions for you to think about that.
So, you know, I'm sure that there's lots of intelligent answers I can give, but I'm just going to give the most basic and blunt answer. We are nothing if we're not history. That means the Jewish nation is nothing if it's not history. Otherwise, we're just, you know, a bunch of people trying to get ahead in life and make sure that we can put food on the table, which to a certain extent, that's what we are. That's what everybody is. The whole world, no one is different. But what the Jews have, what we as Jews have, perhaps more than anybody else, is an unbroken chain of history going back thousands of years, 4,000 years. That is a remarkable legacy. And I think that sometimes, because it's so overwhelming, people tend to stick to the, what you call in England motorways, we call in America highways of history. And I'm much more interested in the byways and the crooked paths, because I think that they add flavor and they add depth and they add warmth to history in a way that the motorways can never provide. That the most important role of a rabbi today is to be the friendly face of Judaism. And I think that one of the biggest issues is that rabbis see themselves as other things. So they want to see themselves as some kind of superior class, or as a politician, or as something else. And I really think that the interface that people have with Judaism is so limited, and it's so important for them to have an interface that gives them a positive feeling about Judaism. And I think that the rabbi's role really is to find, and each community is different. Some communities, it's going to be that the rabbi has to give the best Gemara shir. That's going to be the role of the rabbi. But not every community is interested in learning Gemara. For some of them, it's going to be history. For some of them, it's just going to be a friendly call. Sometimes it's all three, which can be a bit overwhelming. But what one has to do is find that interface between Judaism and the congregants and the congregation that is going to carry that congregation forward, either in its existing location or through the children and grandchildren of the people who are members of a shul. And, you know, I try my best in that role. I've done it in many guises over the years, including as a radio presenter. I think that one has to find that method of communication that's going to enable people to say, I love Judaism, I love being Jewish. Here's a representation of what it means to be a Jew, an ambassador of Judaism. And I see that person as my mentor, as my role model.
Rabbi Pini, in the late 1980s, you became quite close with the legendary father of modern day Jewish music, Shlomo Carlebach. Could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with him and tell us some of your recollections?
I'm going to show you something. So here, can you see that?
Bring it a little bit closer. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This is a photograph that was taken on October 16th, 1994. It was Ronnie Scott's in the West End in Soho. That was a jazz club. I don't know if it still exists. Ronnie Scott was a famous trumpeter who later opened up a jazz club in the West End in Soho. And we hired it for the night, and it was a concert that Shlomo Carlebach gave with a kosher meal. We had about 250, 300 people who attended. And it turned out to be the week of Shlomo Carlebach's passing. He passed away on the 20th of October, 1994. He'd spent his last week with us in London. And I still have a recording somewhere of that concert. It was an amazing concert. It included a visit of Israeli veteran soldiers who came up on stage, and they gave him a special award. It was an amazing evening.
Well, he suddenly took ill straight after that event.
He wasn't well. I would imagine that he had terrible heart disease. You know, he had congestive heart failure. And it must have got worse during the course of the week. I'm sure the stress of traveling didn't help him. And he returned to New York. He wasn't feeling so well. He said to his daughters he wants to come to them. They lived with their mother in Toronto. And unfortunately, he got on the plane in LaGuardia Airport, and he died before the plane took off. That was on Thursday. And on Monday, which was just over a week after that photograph, the event of the photograph that you just saw, I was at his funeral in Har Menuchot in Jerusalem.
Gosh.
I'll tell you how I got to know him, because it's a curious story. When I was growing up, we didn't listen to Shlomo Carlebach because he was a little bit out of the mainstream. He was a hippie, and you know, he was very physical. He wasn't Shomer Negia. I know now in COVID we're all Shomer Negia, but as a rabbi, as an Orthodox rabbi, it was rather curious that he would hug and kiss everyone, including women. And certainly in the very frum community that I grew up in, he was frowned upon, as was his music. And many people, including my father, remembered him from his yeshiva days. He went to Lakewood Yeshiva and were very disappointed in his descent, as they saw it, into this quite odd lifestyle that allowed him, where he allowed himself all these liberties. But his music, no one could argue, no one could deny, was absolutely incredible. And when I went to yeshiva, there was this sort of underground group of bochrim, of students at Gates at yeshiva, who were extremely fond of Shlomo Carlebach. And I can't tell you I'd never heard of him or heard his music, but it was not music that we listened to. There was one fellow who was a little older than me, this was in 1986, who said, you've got to come with me one night, it was a Thursday night, we've got to go out into the countryside near Gateshead to a place called Kibblesworth. It's pitch black, you can see the stars in the sky. And he took with him one of these big stereo boxes with a cassette recording of Shlomo Carlebach. I still remember it to this day. It was Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. You've got to hear the story of the Schwarze Wolf. Never heard of the Schwarze Wolf. Who's the Schwarze Wolf? We went, and it was a battery-operated, large stereo box. And we went in the middle of a field, and we sat there, and we listened to this story. Shlomo Carlebach was an incredible raconteur. He drew you in. He would suck you into a story. Sometimes the stories were a bit banal, but it didn't seem to matter. He could tell a story. He would half sing it and half say it, and then he would burst into song in the middle or at the end. It was so compelling. I was a young boy. I mean, I was 16 years old. I found it so compelling that I went back to the yeshiva and I started looking for people who had recordings of Shlomo Carlebach. You couldn't buy them. It wasn't possible to buy them in Gateshead. And I wasn't going back to London for some time. And I managed to find, and I couldn't stop listening to them. I was just listening and listening and listening. And as the months went by, I went back to London. I managed to get a few cassettes of Carlebach. I would listen and listen. And at some point, a few months later, maybe 3 or 4 months later, I said to my father, is there any way I can reach him? He said, I don't want you to call him. So I really want to speak to him. I find him very inspiring. So he said, well, I don't have his number, but he has a cousin who lives around the corner from us. You'll know who it was, Meki Korn. Moshe Korn lived on Helenslee Avenue.
Oh.
So I phoned him from Gateshead Yeshiva, and I said, hello, it's Pini. Yeah, how are you? I said, I'm in Gateshead. I hope you don't mind me asking, do you have a phone number for your cousin, your first cousin, Shlomo Carlebach? He said, sure, and he shuffled off, and 30 seconds later, he came back, and he rattled off a number. I want to tell you, I memorized the number. I didn't have a pen with me. I remember it to this day. It was 212-725-7153. That was the number. I called the number, and a woman picked up. Now, I didn't know it at that stage, but he was never at home. So what would happen was he had a trip mechanism that if he didn't answer the phone after 3 rings, it would go to a central answering service. And this woman always answered the phone. She was his, as it were, receptionist. She didn't live in his house. She lived somewhere else in New York. And I had many conversations with her afterwards. But this was the first time I ever spoke to her. And I want to tell you, she was not a pleasant woman. She wasn't polite. She wasn't helpful. But this particular time, I said, I hope you don't mind, can I speak to Rabbi Carlebach? She said, who's speaking? I said, my name is Pini Dunner. She said, he's not here. I said, where is he? He's in Los Angeles. Can you give me the number? I can't explain to you why. She gave me his phone number. And I put the phone down, and I don't know if you remember, they had phone cards in those days. The way it worked was you paid, let's say, £5, and every time you used 1 unit, it would smack down on the card until the units ran out. It would make a groove in the card. I guess if you had, each unit was 10p, so if you had 50 units, whatever it was. So I put the card in the machine, and I'm calling America. It was an international call. I called Los Angeles. I cannot tell you what time of day or night it was in Los Angeles. I had no sense of time zones. It was a hotel. I said, can I speak to Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach? They ring through to the room, and he picked up. This entire process had taken me less than 5 minutes. From the moment I'd put the phone down to my father and phoned Meki Korn until me speaking to Shlomo Carlebach took me all of 5 minutes. So he picks up the phone. I said, is that Shlomo Carlebach? He said, yes. I said, my name is Pini Dunner. I'm calling you from England. Did you say your name was Pini Dunner? I said, yes. He said, do you know you are the holiest Jew I've ever spoken to in my life. I said, what? He said, you are so holy, brother. I'm so happy I'm speaking to you. Thank you for calling me. Now, I can tell you that subsequently I heard him say this type of thing to many people, none of whom was in any way deserving of such a compliment. But at that moment, as a 16-year-old boy, hearing my newfound hero calling me the holiest Jew he had ever spoken to in his life, I was like in the seventh heaven. And we began a conversation. And after about a minute and a half, I said, I'm going to run out of money because my card, it just was banging down on the card. I was going to run out of money on my phone card. He said, no problem. I'm calling you right back. What number? I was in a phone box on Coatsworth Road in Gateshead. So I looked at the number on the phone box and I gave him the phone number. I put the phone down. 10 seconds later, the phone rings. It's Rabbi Carlebach. He said, tell me what you're learning in yeshiva. Tell me, how's your father? How's your grandfather? How's the London community? Are there people who listen to my music? Have you heard my stories? We were just talking and talking. And I was asking him questions about things that he says on his recordings. After about 15 minutes, he says, you know what? It's in the middle of the night and I'm sleeping. And I hope you don't mind. I have to go back to sleep because I have to go have a flight to catch in the morning. But give me your number in the yeshiva and I'm going to call you.
Wow.
So I gave him, there were 3 numbers in Gateshead Yeshiva. And can you imagine that? There was nobody with a cell phone. There was 3 call boxes in Gateshead Yeshiva. 2 on one side of the Beis Medrash downstairs and 1 on the other side of the Beis Medrash. And I gave him all 3 numbers. He says, I'm going to call you at least once a week during afternoon Seder. Tell me the times. He must have written it down somewhere. I told him the times. He said, I'm not going to say it's me, because if I say it's me, then you're going to get into trouble. I'm going to say it's my cousin, Moshe Cohen. Okay, that's the name. He said, I'm going to give the name Moshe Cohen, and then you'll know it's me. Okay. I want to tell you that from 1986 to when he died in 1994, he called me at least once a week, wherever I was in the world, or I called him.
Wow.
He would call me every single week in Gateshead Yeshiva. I didn't know which day it would be or what time. Sometimes it wasn't in the afternoon, sometimes it was even, but somebody would come to me and tap me on the shoulder in the Beis Medrash, Moshe Cohen's on the phone for you. And I would go downstairs and he would talk to me. I'm telling you, we spoke every single week for the rest of his life.
Unbelievable.
And I'm thinking to myself, how come? Why? What was going on here? I can't explain it. He had a profound influence on me, an absolute profound influence.
Gosh. Who else had a profound influence on you? Who are your role models? Who are your heroes?
I have many. My father was one. So you mentioned him. My father was also an exceptional raconteur and speaker, and a very, very warm personality. An incredible hard worker for Jewish community causes all over the world. You know, I hear the craziest stories. A few weeks ago, somebody called me up. You know, I wrote an obituary because Willie Stern passed away. He was my sister-in-law's father. So somebody in New York must have been sent the link, went on my website and found me and suddenly called me up on my cell phone. She says, are you the son of Rabbi Dunner? I said, yes. And she says her name. She says, you won't know who I am. I want to tell you a story. In 1970, I was on a flight from New York to London. I was a young girl. I was in my late teens. I was going to visit family in London. And I was on the plane, and there was a man sitting close by and saw that I'm a Jewish girl and that I hadn't ordered kosher food. So he went to all the other kosher food passengers on the plane and asked them to give one of the things from their kosher meal so that I could have my kosher meal. I could have a kosher meal. That man was your father. When I got to London, she said, he gave me his number. He said, if you need anything, please call me. As it turned out, I went to my family. They weren't really expecting me to stay with them. So after I was visiting them a few hours, they kind of said goodbye to me. So I said, do you mind if I make a phone call? And I went to the phone and I called your father. I said, I don't have anywhere to stay. I stayed in your house for 3 weeks with your parents. That's what this woman told me. I don't even remember her name. She said, you won't remember because your mother was pregnant with you. I saw that you were born in 1970. That's what she told me. She said, over the years, I've meant to call him. Is he still alive? I said, unfortunately, he passed away quite a few years ago. She said, you don't know how meaningful it was to me. It changed the course of my life. I have stories like this that happen to me at least once a month. Somebody tells me some story of that nature about my father. Something he did which is completely random, for which he got no credit, and he wasn't interested in any credit. He just did a good deed, just did a mitzvah.
Unbelievable.
Besides all the great things that he did that people know about.
Unbelievable. I'm speechless. You know, we say on Yom Noraim, Zocher Kol Nishkocho, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu remembers, the Almighty remembers all the secret actions, and we probably don't even know the half of it. Unbelievable story. I want to end with one or two final questions. Tell me, you know, people are interested to know what's life like in Beverly Hills. You're now the rabbi of the synagogue in Beverly Hills. How does it compare to London? Tell us a little bit of an insight to that. And we'd love to have you back in London. I don't know if you ever got any plans to come back, what your plans are for the future.
So the answer is that the weather is much nicer in California.
For sure.
You know, I always tell people the difference between California and the UK is in California, it rains for 10 days a year. And in the UK, it's sunny for 10 days a year. So there's a big differential. I have to tell you that weather makes a difference. I never thought about it when I was younger, but as I got older, it really makes a difference. You're more spirited, in a better mood if the weather is good.
Sure.
I'll tell you the difference in that. I don't know. Listen, I haven't lived in London for many years, and you know, I have no plans to move back to London at the moment. Although I do visit from time to time, and I'd love to come and visit St. John's Wood Synagogue when I'm next in London. Who knows when that will be? The big difference in America is that the rabbis play a significant role beyond their rabbinic activities. That means their opinion is sought in many different spheres. They're involved, for example, it's interesting, we're involved in political campaigns in a way that you're not in the UK. We speak up about Israel much more vociferously here in America than rabbis do in Europe. You know, in Europe, in England, if the chief rabbi says something very positive about Israel, it's national news. Here, it's Dvar Yom B'Yom. It's something that happens all the time. Rabbis are expected to be at the forefront of the campaign to make sure that Israel is safe and secure and that the US-Israel relationship is strong. For example, there is a whole rabbinic division at AIPAC. Hundreds and hundreds of rabbis go to the AIPAC policy conference every March in Washington, D.C., because they are part of the campaign to ensure the American support, both financial and political, for the state of Israel. I'm just giving you one example. Being a rabbi here is a very, very broad definition. And you know, you're involved in educational institutions. Even if you're the rabbi of a synagogue, you're involved in decision-making in local federations, and all kinds of things of that nature. You don't have this division of labor between lay leaders and rabbis. Rabbis are deeply involved and entrenched in all matters of communal importance.
Well, just to conclude, thank you so much. Have you got a closing message? Have you got a closing message to the members of St. John's Wood and Saatchi who'll be watching this video?
First of all, I miss you all. That's very important for you to know. I miss you. I also want to say that we are in a particularly special moment in history. And when you're living in history, you should recognize history. I'm a historian. I love history. You should recognize historical moments and what they mean. We're seeing profound changes in the way we live our lives right now that will probably perpetuate and endure long after the crisis is over. And we should celebrate that. And I'm going to end with this. The second Mishnah of the first Perek of Pirkei Avos says there are three pillars of the world. The first pillar is Torah. You have to immerse yourself in Torah. You have to be involved in Torah. You have to embrace Torah, which is really the word of God. You have to embrace it and introduce it to your life. The second is avoda. What's avoda? Avoda is work, service. That means in the times of the temple, they used to bring sacrifices. Today, it's prayer. And then you have gemilus chasodim. That's the third thing. This is what Shimon HaTzadik said. It's the first quotation in Pirkei Avos. He says that gemilus chasodim is also important, that you need to be kind to your fellow man. Now, these three things have never been more important than they are right now. Right now, we need to hear the word of God. We need to be able to hear what Hashem is telling us. We need to celebrate the fact that God put us here to fulfill and discharge his mission. We shouldn't fear anything. We should know that we are here just to do what he wants us to do. That's Torah. Avoda, prayer. We have to pray, not just for ourselves, but for all those who are suffering and for all those who are going through difficulty. We have to join prayer groups, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's on a conference call. We have to pray on our own, on Shabbos. We're not able to pray in shul. Doesn't mean you should give up prayer. You should make sure that there's prayer. This is a moment when we can do that. And finally, gemilus chasodim. We have to be kind. We have to know that there's people who are really suffering. There's old people on their own who need a phone call. It's nothing to do with their material wealth. They're lonely. They need your friendship. They need a contact with other people. We need to make sure that there's people who may be suffering because they've lost a loved one or because they've got a sick one in hospital, whatever it is, that we're taking care of them. Torah, avoda, and gemilus chasodim, never have these three pillars of Jewish life been more important than they are right now.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Pini Dunner. Thank you.
Thank you.